Good morning. My name is John Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, AGWA. Welcome to this session for water resilience in the AI boom. Uh, I'd like to start off with just some simple opening remarks before we turn to the substance of the discussion. And I want to welcome all of you and the fantastic array of speakers and panelists that we have in store for today. I'd like to just begin by explaining a little bit about why Agua has developed an interest in data centers over the past couple of years. Agua's traditional focus over the past 15 years has been on how we make choices around water in a dynamic climate, work more widely referred to as climate adaptation and resilience, and looking at both technical methodologies and policy issues. As much or more as any group globally, we've promoted water resilience as a new set of operational concepts, issues, and ideas. And that work has expanded slowly as we've realized that many of the core concepts behind water resilience are also relevant to other kinds of shocks and stressors, which often have an intimate connection to water. That could range from the invasion of Ukraine, which had powerful implications on water use across the Middle East and Northern and East Africa, or our work with finance ministries and central banks in how we invest our water through macroeconomic policy as carefully and as meaningfully as we manage our money supply. Water is often a medium of change and connection, and water resilience should also be a powerful framework for ensuring that we manage change carefully and with integrity. Why data centers and Agua? Because data centers and water together make a complex story that is hard to tell in ways that respect that complexity. They are clearly an important part of where most economies are moving globally. Can we make room for them at the water table? Can we ensure that they are a successful part of how we envision economic development? Can we see the water trade-offs inherent in an expanding new sector that allows both that sector to expand and grow and to ensure that our energy and water systems, our ecosystems and communities can also prosper even though we're sharing resources, water resources in new ways? That's the area that we want to explore today. Thank you for joining, and I hope this is the start of a conversation, not the end of one. I'd now like to hand over to our keynote speaker, Josh Weinberg. He's an old friend and colleague. He's a senior advisor for Agua, and he's taught me an immense amount over the past couple of years on the connections between water, data and AI, resilience, and energy systems. Thank you so much. The floor is yours, Josh.
Uh, Thank you so much, John. And in my presentation here, I'll try to give an overview of some of the key issues that we'll discuss and set the scene for our expert panel. Um, so thanks again, John, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. Um, let's begin with one of the reasons why this topic drives so much interest. Digital infrastructure is projected to account for 1% of global GDP over the next 5 years, and even more beyond that. McKinsey, in a recent study, has estimated that this amount, well, usually the middle estimate is around $7 trillion. They estimated that these investments could range between $3 and $8 billion between the constrained scenarios and the accelerated ones. The capacity of water and energy systems are a major factor between the constrained scenarios, continued momentum, and accelerated ones. So they have very significant implications on investments. The breakdown of these investments are about half for the hardware and a quarter on the power generation, transmission, cooling, electrical equipment, which we're talking about here today. So why is water an important part of this story? AI and cloud computing uses water in three ways: directly for cooling data centers, indirectly in the power generation for the energy that serves the data centers, and in the production of hardware. Over half of current data center capacity uses some form of evaporating cooling with water. And there's been many challenges. There's rapid growth. There's clustering of data centers in water scarce regions, and there's required management for demand spikes in summer months when water and electricity demands are highest and often supplies are lowest. Um, we also have rising demands for increased in water that is moving faster than normal utility practice and their processes. And most projections for increase for the direct water demand show them doubling over the next 5 years or more, and indirect demand might be even more. Um, We've also seen a lot of attention to communities having high levels of concerns about impacts on water resources and increased governance actions that's causing delays for approvals and execution for construction, sometimes around the water issues. Um, Beyond the data centers, the hardware required, the semiconductors also require a significant amount of water, and a lot of those production areas are in very water-strained areas like Taiwan and Texas. I won't go into too much details, but semiconductor require ultra-pure water, which actually requires a larger amount of water to be used to achieve that level of water quality that's needed. Um, and these uh, and projections have that semiconductors might account for about 40% of the total water demand in the future for digital infrastructure. Beyond the chips themselves, the rare earth materials that need to be mined and refined also have impacts on mining, water use, and water quality impacts that need to be addressed. Um, Planning for water planning for data centers also has a traditional problem for those of us who have been working with water issues for a long time, and that is the integration and prioritization of water. For data center siting and construction, water is just one of many issues that are needed. Priorities are for energy, latency, access to fiber cables, and land need to be resolved at the same time. And coordinating these priorities, both within governments, between governments and companies, and even within companies, is a challenge that we're commonly seeing. Um, Water risk to local stakeholders has pushed greater interest in these issues, and we're seeing that that's also resulting in increased interest in using alternative cooling methods. But actually, these use need to be balanced against the increased water energy demands they might give, so we can have effective investments and navigate these trade-offs. Uh, Today, we're talking about the AI boom and the shift for AI-capable digital infrastructure is having a major impact on the industry. Uh, Data centers that for AI training and for AI inference, which means local people using the AI to do analysis or for other functions, are significantly larger than traditional cloud computing centers, sometimes 50, 100 times larger in scope. And the current boom is for a lot of these training centers, which can be located in more remote locations, which can allow for, in some instances, uh, siting it in places where water pressures are lower or energy generation, clean energy sources can be more easily sourced. Um, the next wave that might be coming, that is projected to come in the future, is for inference centers, and these will require connections to the closer connections to users, which means that they're likely to be located in similar clusters than we've seen with the cloud computing centers and new sets of clusters, which might make it more difficult to avoid competition with other users. Also, the demand for local AI centers is driving demand across countries who are looking to host their own data centers. So the map of data center expansion is spreading, and at the same time, it will be expected to be clustered in urban areas, similar to previous developments. And this is driving extensive increases in energy demand as well as water demand. The chart here shows that sort of by 2030, there's an expected 350% increase in the AI workload alone um, for for power that will be required in processing power. Um, and the energy sources that will be used for this will have an enormous impact on how much water is going to be needed and what the water impacts will be. If the more that these are sourced from things like nuclear power, coal power, natural gas, the higher water footprint will be relative to solar power and wind power. So the ability to create these options will be paramount moving in the future. And at the same time that we have this exponential growth, we're also seeing a greater divide between national level and industry level interest in data centers and some amounts of local acceptance levels. This research from the company JLL has shown that there is increasing level of national level support, but local opposition is becoming more frequent, which means we need improved translation of benefits that are coming to local communities from the investments that are coming in the data centers. And the key tension point here is whether the economic capital that are coming from this can be used to invest in improving water and energy infrastructure and local jobs. So for me, there's two questions that I'm very interested to hear from the panel as well, is how to build in places with capacity to meet these water and energy demands, and how to build up capacity of those demands through partnerships, investments, and innovations. Um, Finally, from Agua, we see water resilience as an enabler for AI growth in the future and a required starting point. Repeating past procedures that we've seen in the construction of the first wave of data centers, where water is taken as a secondary thing that is looked at, can lead to increased risks and delayed timelines for future development. Early and deeper engagement between planners, utilities, and operators needed to understand the limits, opportunities for regional hubs with data centers to maintain resilient systems to all users. Shown here, the progression from understanding risks to taking direct actions to reduce water risks to engaging in wider basin level action is needed. One thing that we think is important is actually looking at this process as well from 3 to 1 or in parallel. Planning and coordination between stakeholders can focus on moving from regional water resilience strategies that promote the measures to support actions for water optimization in data centers and ensure their water use comes with low risk from other users in the environment. A lot of research has highlighted both the water risks in data centers, but also the high economic output per drop of water used for digital infrastructure. We need to translate that output into real investments to maintain the infrastructure and communities that are embedded in, so we can also address this gap between local opposition and industry enthusiasm. Industry can be well positioned to provide the investments needed to improve water efficiency, environmental health, and other ways across the watershed. I think some of these opportunities and trade-offs will be discussed in the panel. And as I close, there's one key message to take from this. It's that the energy and water systems need to be taken together. You often hear discussions and different points that energy is really the key issue and bottleneck, but the water issues are part of that, This is not a novel concept or recommendation, but here it's absolutely critical. A model where developers find land, energy, and fiber and then figure out water later won't work. Early assessment and engagement with local utilities and authorities is critical. Okay, with that, I thank you for your attention, and I pass it to my colleague, Georgette Marcaday-Keene, the communications lead at Agua, to introduce our panel. Georgette, the floor is yours.
Thank you both Josh and John. That has really set the scene for today's panel. And I'll be joined by Emma Miller, Will Hughes, Marissa Straley and Marshall Brown, who are representing pretty much every aspect of the water resilience and data center equation that Josh covered in his presentation. And while there won't be time for questions from the audience to be addressed during the panel, please do use the Q&A feature and we'll respond to as many as we can either during or after. And thank you all for joining us. I'll give slightly longer introductions to our speakers as I ask questions, but forgive me for wanting to sort of dive straight in. So I'll start with you, Emma. Emma Miller leads sustainability and social impact at Xylem, a leading global water solutions company. Working with colleagues around the world, she embeds sustainability into the company's strategy and operations and oversees partnerships and programs that advance water stewardship and wash access. Emma, Xylem's recent Water in the Economy report highlights pathways that can enable us to both protect affordable, healthy water for communities and then safeguard the innovation benefits of that AI economy. Can you give us a quick overview of how activities around data centers link into Xylem's water stewardship strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, and really excited to join these great panelists today and hear from them as well. At Xylem, our water stewardship strategy really focuses on building resilient water systems that can support both communities and industries that are driving economic growth. And this goes for all industry, but particularly as AI accelerates, data centers are becoming really significant part of that landscape, and the broader AI economy as well is driving up water demand. So the Watering the New Economy report that you're referencing, which Xylem recently published with GWI, has two kind of key findings that I wanted to talk about. The first is that reinforcing what we've been talking about, water demand is rising quickly, and unfortunately often in places least equipped to handle it. It's not just a volume issue, but it's location, it's timing, it's system readiness that all plays into this. And what we're seeing, and what this report found, is an expectation that water demand will increase by 129% by 2050 through these demands of the AI value chain. This, putting it into context, adds an additional 54 billion cubic meters of annual water demand. And while that sounds big, it's actually, putting it into context, it's only a small portion of global industrial water withdrawals, just about under 4%. And most of this, as we said, is coming from projected power generation growth and semiconductor manufacturing, but data centers definitely are not an insignificant piece of this. But secondly, and kind of onto the good news, is that we have the tools to meet this increasing water demand without hopefully increasing freshwater withdrawals. And that's through driving efficiency in cooling processes, through enabling reuse, and looking outside the walls of our data centers or outside of the value chain, even to focus on leak reduction and smarter infrastructure. So we've structured our sustainability goals to focus on reducing that annual water demand and enabling customers to do so, ideally by 2 billion cubic meters annually by 2030. But really, as we think about this, we're not just thinking about the particular solutions and technologies that are driving this, but really trying to form meaningful partnerships and focusing on community needs, and focusing on the locations that need it most. We want to see utilities, industry, and communities coming together to build water secure systems and hopefully play a role in connecting those dots.
Thank you, and thank you for having a good news part as well. That's always encouraging. Marissa, I wanted to come to you next. So Marissa Straley is the sector lead at the Alliance for Water Stewardship, based in Austin, Texas. And as head of the sector team, Marissa engages with current and prospective members to increase the uptake of water stewardship. She also leads planning and preparation for the Global Water Stewardship Forum, and working with members on project-specific activities as well. I wanted to build a little bit on Emma's point there, and in terms of, and Josh also raised this, in terms of existing or sometimes not pre-existing capacity for digital infrastructure. So how do water stewardship challenges and opportunities for this digital infrastructure, the data centers, semiconductor manufacturing and things like that, how does that compare to other industries?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be able to contribute to the conversation. I think the comparison to other industries is that there's just such rapid growth right now. And so the opportunity is, because there is growth, there's new building, there's an opportunity to implement water stewardship from the jump. the challenge is that growth needs to happen quickly. And there's just a tremendous demand for that to happen now. So, with the opportunity to implement water stewardship from the start, it means that there's considerations for the risks and impacts of the catchment area. So thinking beyond the fence line. So understanding the impacts that a data center or a fab could have on the catchment and those operating in that catchment, local communities, other manufacturing sites, whatever, the specific context is, but then also those impacts from the catchment on the site. So, that's a tremendous opportunity from the start, from the planning, from the scoping sort of phase to think about those and then consider what your strategy is for mitigating those risks as part of a water stewardship plan. Um, the challenge is that collecting data on a catchment can be a little bit time consuming, and time is money in this space right now. Um, Going back, one other opportunity is engaging with stakeholders. So this is a chance to engage with the utilities, the regulators, um, the communities to really build some trust and social license to operate, which could be really, really useful. And so through those data collection processes, there's opportunities for transparency and sharing of information that can be really useful. So yeah, in comparison to some other industries that aren't seeing this growth, this is a little bit unique to this digital infrastructure space.
No, I can imagine, and I think we'll dive a little bit further into that in a moment. But I wanted to pass on to Will now. Will Hughes leads water replenishment efforts across Amazon Web Services, sourcing and investing in community water projects that build long-term resilience through efforts to restore watersheds, expand access to clean water, and eliminate water waste. He developed and led Amazon Web Services' Water Positive program, which commits Amazon to returning more water to communities than the company uses in data center operations by 2030. Will, Amazon has a new report outlining this vision of responsible water use by data centers. We've been hearing a little bit about enabling factors and conditions and considerations. And so I was wondering if you could give us a quick rundown of the sort of 4 principles that Amazon Web Services uses to approach the designing and managing of these data centers in this responsible manner.
Absolutely. And I intend to be a bearer of good news here because I think there's a lot of great momentum happening around water sustainability in the industry, as well as opportunity to use some of these cloud and AI tools to help improve water performance and water sustainability across a bunch of industries. So we have a goal at AWS to be water positive across all of our data center operations, and that is to put back more water than we're taking out. We want to have a net positive impact on water availability and water sustainability where we operate. And so there are we're really trying to share the best practices that we've learned because we've been at this for as long as just about anybody. And so we put out this report when we launched the AI Water Nexus end of last year. And there were 4 principles that we want to share about how a data center operator can manage water sustainably. The first is kind of an overarching point, which is you need to have a tailored water strategy that is specific to that area. So we use water for cooling in many places because it helps us to reduce peak energy demand, helps us meet other sustainability goals like net zero carbon, and our carbon-free energy goals. But you have to look at both of these things together, right? You have to manage energy and water together to minimize those impacts. And so in some we in some places you say even if we're really efficient at using the water, it's still not the right thing to use any amount of water for cooling, say in Cape Town, South Africa, in Mexico, in India, in the Middle East. Those are places where we've designed a strategy and switch to cooling strategies that don't use water because of the absolute scarcity in those. Where we do use water, we're guided by kind of these 3 principles that feed into the water positive commitment, which is 1, be as efficient as you can. We've improved, we hear a lot about the growth of the industry, but we've really been holding the line on water use even as we've grown in the past few years. We've improved our water efficiency by 40% over the past several years, and we're about 82% more water efficient than the industry average overall. So that saves a lot of water, leaves more water in the environment and in public water systems. The second is thinking about what types of water we're using for cooling. Wherever possible, we are leaving the potable water for the community and for the other uses by instead using recycled water. So essentially treated sewage for cooling. We can use that safely and leave the potable water for other needs. We're investing over $1 billion in recycled water infrastructure that will, yes, supply our facilities, but also be an asset to the community that other potential recycled water users can tap into. And that builds a lot of resilience for the community because communities make wastewater and recycled water even in a drought. And so we're going to have in the next couple of years about 120 of our facilities using recycled water for cooling, which is the most in the industry. And then finally, the third principle is after you've, done that basin-specific water plan and after you've maximized efficiency and thought about recycled water, the last step is to replenish the remaining the remaining potable water that you do use in that community through a project that is really specific and relevant to the needs of that community. In some places, like in India and Indonesia, we focused on expanding water access, water and sanitation access. In other places, we're recharging groundwater or helping water utilities reduce leakage, helping farmers optimize irrigation so that they avoid overwatering. In other places, we're more focused on water quality and the ways that we can help support the key water resources that everyone is tapping into. So through all of those things together, I think you can really actually leave the communities and the watersheds better off through your presence in that place, and that's what we're aiming to do.
Thank you, and I think that gave a good sort of oversight of what is possible. We'll go a little bit further into how to make it actually happen in a moment. But I wanted to move on to Marshall. So Marshall Brown has been the general manager of Aurora Water since 2012. Marshall has over 30 years of experience in the water industry. He began in the private sector, where he worked on water resource evaluation and development, feasibility studies, groundwater modeling, groundwater characterization, and remediation, before moving into the utility space. So, Marshall, as a couple of people have already mentioned, data centers are being built and they will look to continue to be built, and it's happening sort of very, very fast. And it's how can, what I wanted to ask you is sort of how can water utilities best manage having these new huge industrial users in their service areas? What would preparedness look like, and what does it look like for you and your colleagues? And I guess then in turn, what would resilience look like as this industry expands?
Yeah, thank you, Georgia. First, I'm going to qualify with we just had a power outage, ironically, in the middle of this webinar. So my connection's a little bit unstable, so I apologize for that if I drop or. Secondly, so Aurora, Colorado, so arid west, water scarcity, and creating data center or any large water user demand on the system that's able to be met by the system is critical. So Aurora, 5-6 years ago, recognized we needed to create water criteria for large users who were coming to our system. It wasn't driven by data centers at the time. We have about 9 data centers. We do not allow large water demands on our system. So we established criteria that have allowable water uses, and we've published those, made them readily available. And then we let the any industry, adapt to those user guides. So the other thing I should point out is for us, Aurora is one of the few utilities in the arid West that has 100% potable reuse capabilities. So reuse water for applications like data centers doesn't help us at all. We're taking 100% of our water that's used and we're routing that now into our potable system. So all water to us is potable water. There is no lower quality water, lower level water. We take it all, we treat it all to potable levels and we use it in our potable system. So and for us to create the reclaimed supplies with a little lower levels of treatment doesn't really save us any money either, which is kind of interesting. So we've established the criteria. Data centers, Aurora has the largest data center in Colorado that has been developed under that large water user guide. And again, Will kind of alluded to this. It's a zero water use. It's a closed system using refrigerant, and its water footprint is extremely low. So we have the largest data center in Colorado that has the lowest water footprint. It uses a little less than 500,000 gallons per month. And most of that use is for irrigation and domestic purposes. It's not a cooling need. That's the same large water user guide applies to other large water users. So we have had one data center developer who chose not to come to Aurora. They chose to go somewhere else because of that criteria. But generally speaking, what it's doing is driving efficiencies in the water space. Aurora Water is obviously just a water utility, so we don't get too involved in the energy space. We have a lot of coordination with the power utility. We deal with a few power utilities actually, and we have coordination there, but we don't necessarily make any decisions relative to water efficiencies in the power provider space. So we stay focused on water. And again, it has worked very well for us. And there are other large evaporative cooling uses. Those are also going to more efficient applications. So what we found is providing the criteria, communicating transparently early and often is working really well, and we're not having impacts on our water footprint. The other thing I will point out just briefly is there are advantages to our sewer collection system as well. So data centers, if they're using large evaporative cooling applications, send large slugs of water to your sewer collection system. So you have to design both the water distribution and sewer collection systems to meet those needs. We don't have those discharges either from these non-water use cooling applications. So it helps stabilize and help with treatment on the wastewater collection side as well.
Thank you, Marshall. And that was, I think, perfectly timely to start thinking about how this actually looks on the utility level. And I'd like to ask a couple more questions in a moment about partly in terms of how scalable that criteria is, how big a data center you might be able to take on, and also how to sort of incentivize the creation of such criteria if it does then pose this risk of losing potentially revenue from such a presence. But I'll give you a couple of moments to think on that one, because I'm going to move on to Marissa briefly. So Marissa, I actually wanted to go a little bit deeper on Marshall's question, especially on this question of preparedness. I know that the Alliance for Water Stewardship has guidance that's sort of applicable across sectors, not just specifically to data centers or digital infrastructure. But what have you seen as critical, and if you have seen examples of sort of truly embedding water stewardship into the planning and construction of data centers? What has been that sort of critical element that has meant that water stewardship has been able to be part of the planning and construction?
Yeah. So again, I think it's working beyond the fence line. So understanding what's happening in the catchment is really, really critical. Again, on the infrastructure or the data centers or fabs being built, but then also the impacts that they have on the catchment. So truly embedding that is water stewardship. I think transparency, again, is a really key element, and engaging with the stakeholders. So I don't have a exact example to offer of it in a plan to share, but what I would say is, like the examples that Emma and Will gave about the engaging with the communities, doing projects, understanding the impacts, and making that important parts of their strategies is exactly what that means. We have worked with several AWS members who understand the impact that their supply chain has. And so, how they have worked with their suppliers to encourage them to adopt, implement water stewardship. That is a really, really critical element of that kind of adoption, particularly if a brand is encouraging their suppliers to take that on. That's a really helpful, important sort of encouragement along the way. So that's what I would say.
Of course, and in terms of when water stewardship comes in, of course, there are already existing data. There's sort of some companies will both build and manage the data center. Others will lease themselves in or out of a place. But how have you seen sort of successful integration of water stewardship into those processes?
Yeah, so like I said, the engagement, the understanding, and mitigating the risk. So implementing that in water stewardship is very context specific, and it will vary depending on the catchment in which a site is. And so there's examples of working collectively, several sites working collectively to protect or repair an ecosystem. There's examples of engaging with communities around access to drinking water and sanitation. So, yeah.
Good. And yeah, it sounds like, and I'm gonna, Emma, come to you now to dig a little bit deeper into this question, because it's also, and Josh also touched upon this, a question of making sure that water stewardship is maybe not the very first question that's asked, but one of the very first questions that's asked in terms of where and how these centres are built. So yeah, Will, Marshall, and Marissa now have all offered some insights into the elements of a process that can contribute to water resilience for data centres and the communities around them. And I wanted to ask a little bit sort of how to put that into action, or how Xylem is sort of working with the industry to actually support the utilities and local communities in which they operate. And if you can also sort of like what sort of groundwork was needed to set up these types of partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we're definitely in a unique position as Xylem. Being a technology and solutions provider, we have a value that we've started to see we can play in being a connector, and in translating that into kind of investment and scale. We just for kind of context, we already work across the water cycle. We're working with utilities, we're working with industrials, often both in any given city. Maybe that's, assisting in a digital transformation effort, like that what we've seen in Aurora, leading utilities that are really faced with challenges like drought or growth, but tackling them head on with innovative technology. Or we're working with an industrial user that's already, putting steps in to enhance their reuse or optimize usage, but now looking to build a broader, stewardship strategy and goals. And we can kind of connect those dots. Or, maybe where we aren't already working or have a footprint, there's tried and true solutions and case studies that we can pull from all over the world that can then be adapted to local challenges, so that we're not starting from square one every time. The idea here is, and how it relates to investment, is that giving a community tools to kind of tackle an issue, something to build from, solutions that can be scaled, whether that's within a geography, something we see working already for a utility that if we bring in additional funders and can kind of foster collective action, can be scaled, or something that can be replicated in new geographies. So, like we said, the technology is there, whether it's high efficiency cooling or whether it's reuse or digital platforms. It's just a matter of how we get that support to scale. I'd also put in, outside of Xylem's role, there's broader, and kind of going back to the Watering the New Economy report, what we need to see in terms of, integrating water planning into economic development decisions, instead of treating it as a separate issue, and fostering a water transition, if you will. A few things that can help with that are clearer regional planning, and regulatory frameworks to encourage reuse, in particular, where that is a value add for the community. It can signal that reuse is a preferred pathway, and help drive a willingness to invest earlier. Public-private partnerships, particularly those that are enabling co-funded infrastructure upgrades. We've seen that work exceptionally well. We've partnered with Amazon and others on this call here, but Will can definitely speak to it better than I can even. But in Mexico, we've partnered with Amazon to help drive their water stewardship strategy, leveraging Xylem's digital leak detection and pressure monitoring tools with utilities in Monterrey and Mexico City, and really strengthening the reliability of those municipal systems through those actions. And then through all of this, I would say that coming out of a project like that, or really any of these scenarios, it's just really important to leverage data, leverage impact metrics and storytelling to bring these impacts to life for the community, bring them in, and make sure that those dots are being connected. Because in order for something to be an investment in resilience rather than just an investment in increased capacity for industry or for utility, it needs to have shared value, and everyone needs to win. Whether that's the companies scaling growth, utilities in the community, everyone can kind of get on the same page when we see those impacts.
Thanks, Emma. And I think that's a really interesting point in terms of investing in resilience versus just investing in expansion. Will, I actually wanted to come to you. Amazon Web Services has made great progress, as you mentioned, in increasing water efficiency. And we've heard some of the ways that you and Xylem and others, sort of how on the utility end, how they're working around water efficiency. But I'd be interested to hear how Amazon Web Services approaches trade-offs in terms of how to get that most positive impact for every dollar invested in water-related efforts, and maybe following on a little bit from this sort of delineation of investing in expansion versus investing in resilience for both the data center but also for the community around it.
Yeah, I mean, we do both within the water program. Obviously we pay for any upgrades to infrastructure that need to happen, if we're coming to a community. The projects I'm talking about are separate from that, and just investments in building resilience above and beyond the kind of core infrastructure questions of what's needed to supply our needs. It's more about building resilience for the community. And so, yeah, I think we look at, a lot of people may wonder, why do we use any water for cooling at all? And again, it is about balancing energy and water together. Now, could you eliminate all water use? You could, but I think the question I'm always asking is, at what cost, and could we do more by investing within the watershed as opposed to just within our four walls? So, the data centers that we just announced in Indiana, these are data centers that are going to be using water for cooling about 2% of the year. The rest of the time, we're not using any water for cooling. We're just bringing in outside air to cool things down. They're going to use about 500,000 gallons of water per year. And that's withdrawal, not consumption. That's less than the car wash down the street. And so now, could you eliminate that? You could put in, there are things you could probably do to increase the number of times you cycle that through, but we're already at such a low water impact. If it's going to cost you a few $1,000,000 to get rid of that last 500,000 gallons of water, that's not very much water. What could you do with that, with a few $1,000,000 instead in the watershed by helping the water utility reduce leakage or helping farmers optimize irrigation. You can achieve many times more positive impact by thinking about where that trade-off is. And yes, first off, let's be clear, be as efficient as you possibly can. But then at a certain point, realize that there may be more benefit to investing in replenishment. And that's kind of how we set that program up, is to always be asking ourselves, what is that trade-off and how do we maximize the impact for every dollar that we invest? And that's how, we're currently in our replenishment portfolio. We've funded more than 45 projects, which are collectively returning 18 billion liters of water to communities every year. And there, again, we're asking how do we make the best use of that? And it's really about a careful engagement with the community. We often start with the water utility, understand the challenges that they're facing, and then talk with local stakeholders, NGOs, groups that know that watershed well. We're not coming in and saying, here's what you have to do. It's a very comprehensive community engagement plan that leads us to figure out that best balance between maximizing efficiency, thinking about recycled water, what the right type of replenishment investment is, so that we can be sure both maximizing the value of that and leaving the watershed better off than before we were there.
That's interesting to hear those trade-offs and how Amazon sees them as well. So thank you so much for sharing. And I actually wanted to pass on to Marshall, which this is pretty much the last question I have for the panel. So if anyone also wants to add a couple more cents into the conversation. Marshall, you're still there, good. Perfect. So building a little bit onto what Will and Emma have covered there in terms of when a data center or this sort of user is entering a basin or and interacting with utilities. You mentioned this the guidance that you've developed and using that as a way for the utility to manage that sort of demand and to be able to then create this what sounds like incredibly efficient data center. So I just wanted to ask a little bit. Yeah, first I mentioned a second earlier, but in terms of how that could be scaled, but also how to incentivize the development of such guidance when it does pose that risk that a data center might leave. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you and Aurora Water have made again that sort of trade-off in terms of protecting the basin, and what if you could offer, I guess, advice or a response to say other water utilities. What can they do, or what do you guys all need to be able to develop this sort of guidance and implement it?
Yeah, great questions. So Aurora did get out a little bit in front. So we were actually the first utility I'm aware of that created guidance like this. And initially we created it as guidance. So I should have probably clarified this. We had it in our design standards and said, hey, if you want to come develop in Aurora, this is the criteria we would like you to meet. 4 years ago, I think we actually put it into code. So it's no longer just a guide. It's actually codified in Aurora. So it's required that anybody who comes to Aurora has to follow the criteria in that guide. When it was approved, we had various elected officials who actually codified it, mentioned this will definitely not allow certain uses in Aurora, which has been the case. So we don't have water bottling companies who are able to come here. Beverage companies are not able to come to Aurora. Food processing, many of those facilities can't meet the efficiency criteria. It hasn't really affected the cooling space because cooling technologies can shift to much more water-friendly footprints. And we have, since we created that criteria, again, a lot of confusion out there focused on data centers, at least in the arid West. We've had neighboring utilities. Denver Water is immediately adjacent to Aurora. They recently passed their council, put a moratorium on any new data centers until they could figure things out more clearly on how to manage the water use specifically. And the same day they created the moratorium, they called Aurora and said, hey, we need to better understand your criteria, what you've done, how you're allowing data centers to come in and how they are so efficient. So we're sharing the criteria across the industry. Again, it's a little bit unique to an arid climate, how we've approached it. Systems that we've coordinated with in the eastern United States have plenty of opportunity for reclaimed water. So they are going a different route. They're maximizing opportunities to have data centers additionally help invest in reclaiming and reusing water, and water reclamation and use of the reuse water is a great strategy in the east compared to in the arid west, where it's really needing to create every efficiency we can in the water space. So I think I've answered all your questions, but I may have missed one.
No, that was really interesting, and thank you for shedding some light as well onto exactly how locally specific some of these measures and opportunities are, right? Because that puts the need to engage with communities that Emmanuel and Marissa all referenced. That need to engage with local actors and communities is even more important because of exactly how local some of these differences are. And Aurora has succeeded, from what I'm hearing, in not only developing that criteria, but then also getting it codified and having that. I think it was also good and interesting to hear about how it was also that political buy-in, and that it was on all levels that you had this push to have this codified, because that's obviously going to be crucial to Aurora's water resilience going forward. We have a couple of extra moments now, and I actually wanted to maybe ask a question to either Will or Emma. So I'll let you guys decide which one of you wants to answer it once I've asked. But just and only just a minute or two of reflections. But we heard in Josh's presentation a little bit about the water that's also embedded in the supply chain, and I was wondering if either Xylem is part of that supply chain for a lot of companies. I was wondering if either of you could offer some insight into how that's also being factored into when looking at the water use or the water resilience of a data center. To what extent are you able to integrate the supply chain? I'll give you guys 5 seconds to choose who's going to speak. Will, you go first.
Sure, I'm happy to start. Yeah, I mean, I think we've really so far a lot of this is pretty new, right? And so I think we've created a really robust structure around the direct operations and the water use there, and are really leading the way on a number of those things around efficiency, recycled water replenishment. The supply chain is something we're working on better understanding now. The thing I'll say that often gets lost in the scope to, water use associated with energy generation is that we set a goal to be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2030. We ended up meeting that 7 years early. That is a lot of energy that we're bringing online. That's very low water use. That is wind and solar. And so I think that mitigates somewhat not completely, but to some significant degree, the water use associated with energy generation. Now, the next level understanding that you need to get to is often it's not the case that the renewable energy generation is right next to your facility. And so then you need to understand, is there a difference in watershed from where your facility is located versus where the renewable energy is located, and then maybe try to figure out what a mitigation strategy would be. But it's not so simple as just adding up one giant big number based on a grid mix. There's much more complexity to it, and we're working to understand that now.
Because do you find that there's a tension between resilience and efficiency, in the sense of sort of using less water is not necessarily reducing vulnerability or building resilience in and of itself, but it will obviously be a part of a suite of potential solutions that will then be able to be resilient to changes in water use. I don't know if that's something that you've come across or that you're hearing.
I mean, I think using less water helps with resilience for the community, right? As does the $1 billion+ that we're investing in recycled water infrastructure in a bunch of communities. Most of them do not have the advanced water recycling that Aurora does, and so it is really additive to come in there and help them build that system out. And so I think efficiency and those investments help build resilience. And you don't want to be standing out as a big water user during a time of drought. And so that's where, when we're reducing our water use, like in India, to 500,000 gallons per year, we are way, way down the list of water users in that community. And I do think
Mhm.
that helps reduce risk both for our operations and for the community.
Absolutely. Thank you for answering that double header. I just threw at you there at the end, and that was I think a good note to end on, because I think Marshall covered how to incentivize it for the utilities to have this guidance, and I think the consideration not only both of like the risk to business business operations, but also reputationally. That it's in the business's best efforts to have this sort of positive and collaborative interaction with the communities they're working in. So thank you to all of our panelists. And in the next couple of days, we'll share the recording of this conversation along with links to some of the resources we've been talking about. So please forward on to any colleagues and peers. As John said, today is very much the start of a conversation that we want to keep having with you all, and that is a conversation that's only getting more relevant for companies and countries and communities. So whichever aspect of water that you work in, I'm sure you'll be coming across these sorts of questions. So thank you to our panelists for giving such a sort of broad hand of it all. I'd now like to hand over to Betsy Otto for closing remarks. I apologise for eating into a couple of your minutes there, Betsy. Betsy's currently a fellow of the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. She spent 10 years as a senior fellow and director of the World Resource Institute's Global Water Programme, and she has 30 years of experience working on pretty much every water challenge you've heard of. So Betsy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Georgette, and what a great conversation. Thanks to Agua and to all the panelists for what I thought was a really, honestly, kind of uplifting discussion, in that I was very pleased that we talked a lot about solutions. And I want to go back to the realities of what Josh showed as well at the very beginning, which is that AI is rapidly accelerating data center demand. That's growing exponentially. And what we're seeing is that that's colliding with a lot of local community worries about rising energy prices. And way too often, water has been left out of the discussion. Obviously not this discussion, but we're going to be hearing more about that as this growth continues. And so I'm very pleased with what we heard. I guess 3 quick takeaways, if I might, and from my experience working in water resilience as well. The first is that we face really daunting planning and knowledge gaps. And I apologize, this is of course when the landscape crew is going to come by with the leaf blowers. And those include a lack of good local data about catchments, about ecosystem water needs, about how much water we actually have. This has been referenced by a number of folks. What cumulative impacts from data centers kind of create tipping points where we cross over thresholds of how local watersheds and catchments can remain healthy. Then add to that climate impacts. So altogether, these are very challenging situations. Organizations like Aurora Water and some communities do a much better job of this than others in doing demand forecasting and understanding what their total water demands and needs are. But in many places, water permitting isn't even required to withdraw water, whether groundwater or surface water. So that's a very daunting, situation that I think we face, and we have to be honest about that. There are successful strategies, we've heard about a lot of them, that can be integrated, whether it's co-funding infrastructure investments, the kind of uber or ultra efficient investments that Will was talking about, as well as the replenishment efforts that Amazon AWS is involved in. And I was really excited to hear about Marshall's discussion about the guidance that they have put together. Because, Emma made a call out, I think that was exactly right, that we need clearer local and regional planning requirements that data centers need to meet, know they have to meet, whether it's for power use efficiency, water use efficiency, et cetera. But how do we scale those strategies that we've heard about? I guess that's what I would leave us with, is, what are the sources for that guidance? Certainly the exemplars, maybe like Aurora Water The American Water Works Association, other global organizations can weigh in on this as well. How can we better translate, as Josh talked about, the value of water embedded in data centers and them being able to operate well into actual infrastructure investment? We know that we are facing an absolute crisis now that's being discussed by communities and water systems across the country, across the world, in failing and aging infrastructure. So we're already not investing enough in that. This is an opportunity, actually, to help do that. And I guess I would just end by saying that the goal should be the best case scenario, as Alex has put it to me, of coordinated reform, where you've got industry, government, industry being both the water industry as well as the data center and AI industry, and communities working in sync. But we need to give them some tools to help them do that. So I'll end there. Thanks so much for a great discussion.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you everybody for joining us today.